Imagine a child born this morning, healthy, crying, alive in every way that matters. Now imagine that no one files the paperwork, not because they forgot, not because they're careless, just, it doesn't happen. Maybe the clinic is 3 days away. Maybe the family doesn't trust the government office. Maybe there's a fee they can't pay. Whatever the reason, the form doesn't get filed. That child grows up, and at some point the world starts asking for a document they don't have. They can't open a bank account, can't enroll in secondary school in most countries, can't get a passport, can't inherit land from their parents when they die, because legally, the relationship between them was never recorded. In some places, they can't access a hospital without being turned away at the intake desk, not because anyone is cruel, because the system has no way to process someone it was never told existed. They are alive, completely, undeniably alive. The state just never said so. And here's the thing that should bother you. This isn't a rare edge case. Right now, roughly 1 in 4 children under 5 worldwide does not have a birth certificate. Over 1 billion people on this planet have no legal documentation of any kind. 1 billion. That's not a statistic about poverty. It's a statistic about a system, a very specific system, with a very specific origin, and a very specific reason it was built. Go back far enough and none of this existed. For most of human history, you didn't need a document to prove you were real. You were real because people around you knew it. Your name was confirmed by your community. Your identity was held by the village, the parish, the trade guild, the family lineage. A man called Thomas the Miller was Thomas the Miller because everyone in that town had known him since he was born. There was no registry confirming it, no clerk filing it, no state witnessing it. It sounds almost romantic, until you realize what it actually meant. Your existence was entirely dependent on the people around you. Move to a new city, and you were no one. Cross a border, and you had to rebuild your identity from scratch. Slowly, through relationships. There were church records, baptisms, marriages, burials, all documented inside ecclesiastical archives. But those were religious documents, not civil ones, and they only tracked Christians. Everyone outside that category, Jews, Muslims, enslaved people, rural poor, indigenous communities, existed completely outside any formal record. This wasn't considered a problem. It was simply how the world worked, until one government decided it wasn't working for them. France, 1792. The revolution had done something no one fully anticipated. It had destroyed the infrastructure of human documentation. The church had been keeping birth and death records for centuries, but the revolutionary government had seized church property, expelled the clergy, and declared religion a private matter. Overnight, the entire system that tracked who was born, who married, who died, collapsed. The solution came on September 20th, 1792, a law creating the État civil, the civil registry. From that date, the state would become the official witness to every birth, every marriage, every death in France. No more priests, no more parishes. The government would now hold the record of your existence. It was framed as progress, liberation from religious gatekeeping, and in a real sense it was. But there's something the official histories tend to move past quickly. The civil registry was signed into law in the same legislative session as the levée en masse, the first modern military draft in Western history, a mobilization that would eventually conscript over 1 million men. Think about what that requires. You cannot draft someone you cannot find. You cannot find someone you have never counted. The registry and the draft didn't just happen to appear at the same time. They were born in the same room, out of the same need. One created the inventory, the other used it. Maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe the timing was incidental. 2 separate committees working on 2 separate problems, and the dates just aligned. That's possible. History is full of coincidences that look like patterns, but then you follow the system as it spreads outward from France, and the coincidences start to stack. Napoleon's armies carried civil registration into every territory they occupied, not just as a bureaucratic export but as a conquest tool. If you could track a population, you could administer it, tax it, conscript it, govern it at scale. Britain passed the Registration Act in 1836. Around the same time, the empire was managing the largest colonial administration in history. The United States pushed hard for standardized birth certificates in the early 1900s. The driving forces, progressive-era reformers trying to regulate child labor, and federal agencies trying to manage a surge of immigration. In French colonial Africa, registration became mandatory by the early 20th century. not because Africans requested it, because the colonial government needed to track labor, military eligibility, and tax obligations. Same outcome, different countries, different decades, different stated reasons. A system designed at its origin to count people, kept arriving in new places every time someone needed to count people. But here's where it gets harder to look at directly. The registry didn't just count people, it also named them, and the naming was not neutral. When formerly enslaved people in the American South were freed after the Civil War, they had no birth records. For generations, their existence had been documented only as property, listed in plantation inventories alongside livestock and tools. The Freedmen's Bureau tried to create new records, but the effort was underfunded, inconsistently applied, and covered only a fraction of the population. Millions entered freedom legally nameless. In Latin America, indigenous communities were registered under Spanish names assigned by colonial administrators. Their original names, names that carried kinship structures, territorial claims, ritual meanings, simply didn't appear in the documents. The record replaced them. In French colonial Africa, the registration forms were designed around French family structures. Father, mother, surname passed through the paternal line. But many African kinship systems didn't work that way. People were registered incorrectly, assigned family structures that didn't match their actual communities. The document didn't capture who they were. It decided who they became. The registry was supposed to be a mirror. In practice, it was often a script. And here's the thing nobody talks about. Those misregistrations didn't stay in the past. They produced legal conflicts that are still active today. Land disputes in Kenya, citizenship cases in Bangladesh, inheritance battles in Brazil. People who can prove their community has lived somewhere for generations, but whose documents say otherwise. The paper outlasted the people who wrote it, and it won. Now return to that number. 1 billion. 1 billion people who are alive and entirely outside this system. Where are they? Sub-Saharan Africa primarily, South Asia, parts of Southeast Asia. Stateless populations scattered across borders, the Rohingya stripped of citizenship in Myanmar, unrecognized in Bangladesh, untraceable to any state. Nomadic communities in Central Asia who have never intersected with a civil administration office, but also people who became undocumented to the collapse of the systems that were supposed to document them. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, millions of people in newly independent states found that their Soviet documents didn't automatically translate into citizenship anywhere. The empire that had registered them ceased to exist. The new nations that inherited its territory didn't always recognize the papers it had issued. Overnight, people with documents became people without a country. When Bangladesh became independent from Pakistan in 1971, millions found themselves caught between two states, recognized by neither. The system doesn't just create documented people, it structurally produces undocumented ones. You cannot have a registry without a threshold, and a threshold by definition has two sides. The system is not slowing down, it's accelerating. India's Aadhaar program has enrolled over 1.3 billion people in a single biometric database, every person linked to a unique 12-digit number, tied to their fingerprints and iris scans. The largest identity system ever built. The stated purpose is inclusion. Give everyone access to services, prevent fraud, streamline welfare distribution. The World Bank's ID4D initiative has a target: legal identity for every person on Earth by 2030. Estonia has moved essentially its entire state infrastructure online. You can vote, pay taxes, start a company, access medical records, all through a digital ID. Citizenship as software. There is a version of this story that is straightforwardly good. More documentation means more access. More access means fewer people turned away at hospital doors. But there is another version running alongside it. When your existence is confirmed by a database, the database can also fail to confirm it. Aadhaar has already produced documented cases, not hypothetical, documented, of people being denied food rations because their biometric scan failed to match. Old fingerprints, a callus, a scanner that didn't read correctly. In a world where your identity is a data entry, a system error is not an inconvenience. It is erasure. The same logic that created the problem in 1792 is now being applied at a scale the French Revolutionary Committee couldn't have imagined. The state is still the witness. It's just that the witness is now an algorithm. Here is what's strange to sit with. In 1792, during a revolution, in the middle of a military mobilization, a French government that would itself be overthrown within a decade made a decision. They decided that the state, not the community, not the church, not the family, would become the official record of human existence. That decision, made in those specific circumstances, by those specific people, for those specific reasons, now governs how every human being on earth proves they are real. The old system was imperfect. It was local and inconsistent and entirely dependent on community memory, but it was held by the people closest to you. The new system is universal, and precisely because it's universal, the gaps it leaves are absolute. Before, if your community didn't know you, you were unknown. Now, if the system doesn't have you, you don't exist, in the only sense that modern life recognizes. We built the entire infrastructure of human rights, rights that are supposed to belong to every person simply by virtue of being alive, on top of a document. And then we made the document hard to get, and then we were surprised when some people didn't have it. The billion undocumented people alive right now are not ghosts. They are not invisible to each other. They are known by their families, their communities, the people who love them. They are simply not legible to the architecture that was built, ostensibly, for them. So here is the question I keep coming back to. Not whether documentation is good or bad, that's too simple. But what does it mean that we decided existence has to be witnessed? And more than that, what does it mean that we handed that witnessing to institutions, to states, to databases? The French bureaucrat who drafted the État civil in September 1792 wasn't thinking about a child born in sub-Saharan Africa in 2024. He wasn't thinking about biometric databases or digital citizenship or the Rohingya. He was thinking about the immediate problem in front of him. The church had collapsed, and someone needed to keep the records. But the solution he reached for, let the state be the witness, that solution is still running, expanding, digitizing, and somewhere this morning, a child was born, alive in every way that matters, waiting to be told they exist.